But welcome everybody to Elevating the Gold Standard in Real Estate. Myself and Isabel, our broker of record, will be joining us today to do this talk. We're going to do it a bit more conversational style. I'm here in Kingston. Isabel's in Bradford, presumably.
Yes.
So we're doing it just Zoom only. It's not hybrid, and there's no one in either of the rooms with us. So this is a pretty important topic and one that I've wanted to talk about, and I do talk to Isabel a lot about a lot of the questions. A lot of the content here has come straight out of her brain. So I'm glad that she could join us, because she is the authority on a lot of the answers to a lot of these questions. So what is the seminar about? Just to kind of give you, because I know like elevating the gold standard of real estate is a very nebulous thing to talk about. What we're trying to do today is we want to talk to everybody about how they can essentially be a better agent by maintaining a higher standard of ethics. There's a lot of black and white in the industry, but there's also a lot of gray, and trying to figure out where on that gray scale you're on the good side versus the bad side is important. And I'd say probably most of the questions I get as a manager is, is it okay to do this? And usually the agent knows it's probably not okay to do that, but they're looking for affirmation that they can, like, bend their morals or ethics and where that line should be drawn. And
I
just
think
in general,
we, yeah,
go ahead.
sorry. I think we were talking about it as well, that when you're studying for your registration and you're getting your license, they teach you all the black and white rules, or at least some of them. And then you get into the industry and you really don't know what the norms are. And unless you've been around for a few years, you're probably a little bit fuzzy about what you should and shouldn't do. And those are things that just come with experience and come with being out there. And so we wanted to talk about some of that as well today. It's more than just ethics and more than just can I do this? It's what's normal in the industry. What makes you a professional out there?
Yeah, and like you hit the nail on the head there as well. Like, street smarts isn't something you get except for being on the street, right? There's
Yeah,
street smarts and there's book smarts. And what a lot of the stuff we're gonna be talking today is on the street smart side of things. Because like you said, the courses, they teach you the rules, the procedures, everything. But when you get there and you're actually dealing with a client and they've got certain questions for you, they ask you to do certain things that are not, covered in the textbook. You need to have the answers and know how to conduct yourself in those situations.
absolutely.
One of the big things too is realtors don't have the greatest public perception in a lot of cases too, right? I'd say that most realtors I know are amazing realtors, but it just takes a few bad apples in the industry to really drag down the name of an industry. And that 100% has happened before, and it'll continue to happen. But we want to make sure that you're not one of the people who are perpetrating this kind of perception of public realtors. So I think we've got a moral and ethical obligation to do the best that we can in the industry and make sure that we stay out, keep everything above board. And most importantly, I know, Isabel, I think you're the person who coined this term. You want to make sure you stay out of RICO jail.
Yeah,
And I spent a little bit of time using AI to generate some images, and I think you might appreciate this RICO jail image more than most as well.
I love that one. It's because once you've been to Rico Jail, or at least walked by the front door of Rico Jail, you understand how stressful and how horrible it is. So you really do want to stay out of Rico Jail. I mean, we would help you out in any way we can, but ultimately, the best course is to stay away from Rico problems.
I'm thinking about Monopoly here. When you pass by the board and you're
Yeah.
just visiting jail. I don't even want to just visit RICO jail. Like, even just like the threat, or like having to like do the skirting around the outsides of dealing with a RICO threat. Oh my goodness! But
Yeah.
trying to avoid it altogether by just keeping everything above board and is a very important part of the process.
Of course,
And
it's also important to show the agents the cell that they do have set up for you at Rico Jail. So
and unlike Monopoly, there's no get out of jail free card.
that's right. It's going to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, and a lot of time too, which is almost
Mhm.
more annoying than potentially the money side of it as well.
right.
So yeah. So again, this is all just about talking about doing your job properly, and we'll take questions at the end because I ask Isabel questions all the time, and it's important to like have that opportunity to ask some of these questions to figure out where you are in that like in that gray scale when you're looking at the black and white and everything in between. So the topics we're going to cover today, we're going to give everyone some examples and talk about certain aspects of the industry in no particular order. We're going to be talking about offers, showings, how to conduct yourself on showings, doing due diligence for listings, disclosures. That's a big one. When you should or shouldn't be disclosing things. We're going to be talking about advertising, representing yourself, and just like truthful statements. Talking about giving advice, giving legal, accounting, tax advice. Spoiler alert: you probably shouldn't be giving any of those things. And then multiple representation, and just talking about how to avoid it, when it's okay, when it's not okay, that sort of thing. Disclosures, Isabel. I start with the biggest one first. I figured we might as well try and bite this one off right off the top.
Absolutely,
Um,
because it's not always black and white, but certain parts of it are. So
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, we were chatting about this earlier today when we were kind of reviewing the slides together. I think we spent most of our time on these slides in particular because sometimes it's not easy to know what you need to disclose. I mean, the rule tells us a specific thing, right, Isabel?
That's right. You have to disclose material latent defects, and that means a hidden defect that makes the property either uninhabitable or is a structural defect. And that's pretty black and white. And if you know about something like that, you have to disclose it. It's all the other ones that are a little bit fuzzy that you don't technically have to disclose, but trust me on this one, and this is what I said to Linus, the neighbors know about it, and they're going to be telling the people once they move in, and then it becomes a problem. So you should be disclosing whatever you can disclose. It's a matter of how you're going to do it.
Yeah, and I say all the time too, whenever anyone has a question for me, "Should I disclose this?" I'm like, "If you're asking me the question, you should probably be disclosing it," is usually the answer that I'd give. And just to break it down a little bit, material latent. So material is something that does impact the value, and then latent is something that's hidden, right? So there is a bit of a sniff test. It's if it's something that can't be found in a typical home inspection is usually the bar that we put in there. So if there's a giant hole in the wall, do you have to disclose that? As long as you can see it, the answer is no, right? Because it's right there. There has to be a hidden defect. Now, of course, there is a lot of gray here too, as to like what is hidden, what's material, and where you have to disclose it. But like both myself and Isabel are saying, if you think you should disclose it, you probably should be. I'm gonna bring up a couple examples. I want to get Isabel's opinion on these ones specifically.
Mhm.
We had just these ones that came up like actually questions to me over the last week. One agent was disclosing in the listing documents on her listing that the pool in the backyard, the drain, wasn't working properly. The pool still functioned and was fine, but as soon as people got heard that there was the broken pool drain, they just ran for the hills, is what she said. So she came to me and said, like, "Can I? That my clients don't want me to disclose this anymore. Is this something that I can possibly not disclose?" So, Isabel, what are your thoughts on that one?
That's probably one that has to be disclosed. Now, we were talking about this, and do you disclose it in the listing and scare people off from the showing? Per Rico would probably tell you yes, but I would tell you no. But once the person is actually interested in the property, then I would disclose it in writing because it is something that's material. The other thing is like be careful in your offers and this is something that can be an insurance issue or a financing issue. Mortgage companies and insurance companies are really scanning the documents now and they are looking for things and they don't always give it the weight that it should have. Like something that you're discussing, the pool drain has nothing to do with the function of the pool. However, an insurance company may have a real problem with it, or the financing people may have a real problem with it. So certain things can be disclosed outside the offer, let's put it that way, especially if it isn't a material latent defect. But if it's disclosable, you can always do it and keep proof that you have done it. Okay?
Okay, let's jump forward and explore that a little bit more because that's
Yeah.
exactly what we wanted to talk about on this next slide here is when and how to do the disclosures. I'm going to go back to a couple other examples after we chat about this a little bit. But I just want to expand on what you were saying there. So the big question that I also get is, okay, I need to disclose whatever this issue is. Should it be on the listing? Should I do it as an attachment in the listing documents? Or is it okay, like you said, to not scare people off and just give them the written disclosure or just like a verbal or email disclosure after they've shown it, but before they put the offer in for something that I know I need to disclose? And as you mentioned before, too, like you don't want to put disclosures on agreement of purchase and sales. That's not what they're for. We've got a form, which is literally called a disclosure form. There's a couple of different versions of them that you can find to disclose exactly these things because you don't want to spook off, like you said, lenders and stuff who see the APS and they see the listings. So, like, where would you draw the line then, Isabel? Like, when would you say it's okay to not attach a disclosure form of latent
I
defects
think it
on a listing? And when is it okay to just to say, "Get you've seen the property. I'm going to send you a disclosure just so you know before you." It seems like you're interested. We want to make sure we have this disclosure in your hand before you put an offer on the property because it may impact your buying decision.
I think that the difference here between the two is it something that's going to affect the um I hate to say use and enjoyment of the property as opposed to the actual functioning of the property. I really believe that if it's something to do with the function of the property, whether it's structural or there's a leak in the basement, something like that, that needs to be disclosed in writing, in the offer, or on the listing. Whereas if it's something that is minor and perceived as not a huge problem or doesn't affect the functioning of the property, then I think you can do it as an off the record disclosure, meaning that you do it in writing, either on the disclosure form or by email, but you don't put it into the agreement of purchase and sale. If it's a grow up, you better put it in there. So,
There you go. So for the more serious things, make sure they're on the listing, and then if it's something again, I like that line that you're drawing, saying if it's like a material, like structural, very impactful thing about the property, you make sure you be a bit more upfront with it. Whereas if it's something a bit more minor, right, just
yeah,
you can wait until like say after they've seen the property.
I think
Um,
so.
and and just to remind everyone too, the forms that are provided by ARIA, those are tools for our tool belt, right? Like you obviously want to use them where you can, but a disclosure through email, like again, it's not like the gold standard, but it still is a disclosure if you're sending someone an email saying like, just so you know, there is this, and that they receive it and they've acknowledged it that way too. But again, I don't want to say like you just go back to an email because the ARIA forms are obviously the gold standard for all these things. But anything in writing is what we're held to in terms of what RICO requires us to do for these disclosures.
Also, now with the new Tressa, they're getting a little bit more definitive as to if you're doing a disclosure um, of a material latent defect, it has to say disclosure and it has to be bold so that you are aware. So that's why I'm saying if it's something that is serious, you need to use the form. But if it's something minor, and I think you have a good example of that, one that I would be doing by email. Um, they're two different types of disclosures. Go ahead, Linus.
So is that other example the one with the hardwood under the carpet? So
Yeah.
we did have another question that came up last week where an agent had some damaged hardwood. It wasn't like boards missing type damage, but it was more than just like surface level scratching on the hardwoods, and it was under a carpet. And he's like, "Do I need to disclose that because like a home inspector can lift up a carpet?" And yeah, I think I was like, you know what, this might be a bit more of a gray area. You might want to just let them know before they do, like that there is a bit of damage to the hardwood, just like as a bit of a heads up. But what are your thoughts on that one, Isabel?
Yeah, I that's one that I would probably be doing by email because it's not structural. It's not actually hidden because a good building inspector should be lifting up that carpet if it's an area rug. But in case they don't, you want the people to know. You don't want surprises after people are moving in, because those are harder to handle than letting them know up front that, there's an area rug and there's some damage under it to the floor. You may be looking at, refinishing the floors down the line. Something innocuous like that, I think, can go in an email and just get them to acknowledge that you've told them.
Final example, and this is one that comes up all the time. Let's say you had a leaky basement,
Mm.
and it was fixed properly. Like the source of the problem was identified, whatever it happens to be. Let's say there's like, some broken weeping tile and then they need to be fixed and remedied. Yeah, excavation was done, everything was replaced, the waterproofing was all put into place for the foundation, that kind of thing. Um, do you have to disclose the basement leaked 3 or 4 years ago if there was flooding because you have fully rectified the problem, there hasn't been flooding since you fixed it, that sort of thing, versus what about, I mean, obviously, I think everyone knows the answer to this, but if you had a leaky basement, you just try to patch over an issue, right? You put on a fresh coat of paint, you drywall over where the mold is on on the foundation wall, that kind of thing.
Well, the first one, where you've had it professionally remediated, technically, you do not have to disclose that because the problem has been fixed and it's not existing anymore. But I will tell you, and this is absolutely the truth. The neighbors always know. And the new people are going to move in, and the neighbors are going to say, "Did you know that 3 years ago they had that whole property excavated and they were waterproofing?" And this causes a whole problem. So that this is one that you don't have to disclose, but I'd be putting that in an email to the new buyers saying, "Just so you know, and we had it professionally remediated, and there's never been a problem since, and we have all the paperwork." That's one that would go in an email. Whereas if it is a true latent defect where you're trying to cover up a leaking issue, and you as the realtor find out about it, you need to disclose it. It's going to
Yeah,
come back to you. They always
hiding the
do.
evidence, hiding the body does not mean that you didn't commit the crime kind of thing, right? So if you're just patching over something 100%, like that has to be disclosed. You shouldn't try and hide it in those
And
situations.
just to let you know, when people are upset about something like this, when a buyer is upset, they usually can't track down the past seller, so they go after the agents. So be very aware of we are held to a higher standard than the public. So when in doubt, disclose, 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 not necessarily as a formal document, but definitely disclose what you think you should be disclosing.
And in the case of the leaky basement where you did remediate everything, especially if you put some major work into it, you can turn that into a big positive, right? Be like,
Mhm.
yes, we know the basement's old, but and there was leak in the past, but we've spent 15,000, 20. We got the receipts to prove it. It was done professionally. We've got everything remediated, fixed. There hasn't been an issue since. Whereas the neighbor might say, "Oh, did you know about that?" Like they're more from a negative side of things. They'll be like, "Yeah, they had problems in the basement leaking, back in the day or whatever, right?" But they don't know the whole story necessarily. They just like to talk and gossip about the negatives. So just getting ahead of that, I think helps a lot in these situations too. So disclosing is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, and actually, I've got a little story about one that um, we had that came in. It was a complaint by a buyer about a year and a half after they purchased a property, and it was a neighbor saying that the property had been used as a grow up, that the garage had been used as a grow up. And we, of course, contacted the previous seller, and he goes, "No, it wasn't." And I said, "Well, the neighbors are saying that um, the heating for the grow up operation, for the lights, etc., was being vented out through the hole in the garage door." And this property was a little bit rural. And he says, "No, the hole in the garage door was when I backed up with my truck and put a pipe through it." So, it's strange things come up after the fact, and you really have to dig down into your seller's, I guess, activities and what's actually going on so that you can answer some of these ridiculous questions. But
And
again, it's a disclosure. It was an obvious hole in the door that really and truly could have been all of this, the lawsuit could have been avoided if the agent had just shot off an email to the other agent, to the buyer's agent, saying, the hole in the door has actually been there for a year, and my client backed up with a truck and a pipe, and that's what happened to it, just so you know, and you don't question it on building inspection. So,
And this flows perfectly into our next topic. You just teed it up, Isabel.
okay.
Talking about doing your due diligence on your listings. Now, I've seen plenty of times where a listing agent just throws up a listing, doesn't do like any due diligence that they should be doing on their listing. And it is your
Yeah,
responsibility to try and find as much information about the history of the property so you can speak knowledgeably about it. And for some of the examples that Isabel was giving, right? So you can get ahead of issues, but you also you're professional. You're putting a product up for sale. It's your job to find out as much as possible about the product, right? We put some examples of things to check in on here that not every agent does. One thing I did want to pick your brain about a bit because I know it was a bit more common in previous years in real estate was pulling the parcel register. Do you still suggest that's a good idea to pull parcel?
absolutely. In the marketplace that we're in now, where people may have purchased the property just 2, 3 years ago, they're refinancing now. Whatever the issue is, it will give you an indication of what's registered against the property, and by that I mean financially. We're running into a lot of problems where sellers are not disclosing when they're in a financial bind. And the parcel register gives you a clue to ask questions if you see that there's a second mortgage registered against the property, if you see that the mortgage is getting very close to market value, what it is now, just to have an open conversation with your seller and say, "I see there's a mortgage. Have you been to the bank to see what the discharge on it is? Is there any issues with the second mortgagee?" That sort of thing that can be a real problem right now. You should be checking. Also, it will show you any liens registered against the property, especially from the town. If there are permits required, were the permits closed? That sort of thing is all in there. And 9 times out of 10, maybe even 80 times out of 100, there won't be an issue. But believe me, when you do find an issue and you start digging down into it, you go, "Oh, thank heavens I pulled that parcel."
It's important to look under the furniture, right? See what the kind of clues you can find to dig up there. And I like the word that you use there, like they're clues, right? It
Yeah,
starts a conversation because there could be stuff that comes up, you're like, "Ooh, that's a bit of a red flag." You just talk it out. You can find that, okay, that's perfectly fine. That's not going to be an issue at all. But at least it gives you the opportunity to talk to your sellers about that kind of thing before it becomes a problem prior to closing, right?
that's right. Surprises are not a lot of fun.
Yeah. So again, there's an exhaustive list here. I don't want to go over everything, but just make sure you do your due diligence. You pull all of the work receipts that you can find, all the permits that may have been pulled and closed, hopefully, for all the different additions, decks, basement apartments. Get all the bills, the tax bills, the hydro, heat bills, like all that kind of thing. So you have that information at your fingertips. And I know the other the other thing too, and I think we're a bit more loosey goosey up here in Kingston with it than in the GTA area is measurements. Like we typically just go off of like the Matterports and everything like that. That's very common up here. But I know that Isabel will say like you want to make sure, and this is across the board. You want to make sure you do verify those measurements because you're at the end of the day you're responsible for them.
Yes, the easiest way is to take something like the MPAC measurements and do your own measurements and compare them and see what's happening. Builders, floor plans, etc., never are completely correct. So always verify whatever measurement source that you're using.
Does it make you nervous now that they can auto populate listings with the MPAC
It
square
does,
footage?
because we're held responsible for that information, and it's not always correct. Um, it used to be a very bad habit of realtors of copying an old listing, which could get you into real trouble. I think these impact measurements, are gonna get us into real trouble as well if agents don't verify.
I got a question for you then too, because if you have the square footage on a listing and it's said that the source was from MPAC, that's a document that's publicly available. Would you be held to the carpet if the square footage is off, based even though you say like, hey, listen, that's what MPAC said. I told you that's what MPAC says. Where do you
I
find the
don't, and I'm gonna say this out loud, I don't know because it hasn't been tested. But MPAC is saying that they are not guaranteeing their measurements. But all we can do to protect ourselves is put the source on there. And I think we have a good fighting chance of winning it if we're ever challenged on it and we say, no, we used MPAC's information and we told you we did.
yeah, and MPAC can definitely be off by quite a
Mm,
bit in a lot of cases too. I've crossed that path many a times.
yes. Yeah.
Next question, Isabel. The as is listing. I know a lot of
Yes.
us have come across estate sales, that kind of thing, where people don't want a warrant to represent anything. They say in their schedule B, this is an as is listing, buyer beware, all that kind of fun stuff. When you've got a listing like that, how does it change the due diligence that you have to do on the property? How does it change anything about disclosures, anything like that?
It really doesn't change an awful lot of anything because our responsibility as realtors is to do our due diligence and make sure we do our disclosures. All as is means is that the seller is not going to rectify anything that is out there, whether it's something that's found on a building inspection or whether it is something that is a latent defect. All they're saying in an as-is listing is, "We're not doing anything about it. Adjust your price accordingly." So that's what an as-is listing is.
Yep. Disclosure requirements are exactly the same standard as they are for any other listing. So that's a really important note because
Yep.
I get that question surprisingly a lot. Be like, oh, they're not worrying. We don't have to like, do any digging in the pro. We don't want to like know anything. It's like kind of like, everyone wants to put their earmuffs on, right? And just pretend like they
Mhm.
didn't hear anything. I'm like, well, it doesn't work like that. You got to do the due diligence, do the exact same job that you would for any other listing. So important to note.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, now listing price on a property. This comes up more than I'd like to admit as well, where someone's like, I think that house is worth, 650. It's like, okay, well, where'd you get that number? I got a good feeling. I know the area. Like, okay, like I get that. That's your gut. But you also want to be able to back that up if you ever get pulled to the carpet on it. You want to talk about that a bit, Isabel?
Only that, our obligations are to know our product, and I cannot fathom agents running around selling properties in areas they're not familiar with. Your job as an agent is to get out there, know your product. I don't know how you can talk to buyers and sellers about actual value of property if you haven't seen the comparable for sales or the comparable solds. And you truly can't do that, I don't believe, without doing your investigating out in the marketplace. So for somebody to fly into Kingston from Toronto for, a day and a half to sell their client a house, I don't know how agents can do that because you need to know your values before you can advise people, and they're relying on your advice. So you need to know what's out there.
On the flip side, I know, like, for the very experienced agent who does know the product really well, they can walk into a house and, like, they can know the price pretty, like, off the cuff, right? So, I mean, a lot of agents' guts are, backed up by experience and just the knowledge in the industry. But, I guess the big question here, and from my aspect, I always recommend, and I've always made sure that I do, like, a very thorough CMA on a property
Yes.
before coming up with the pricing on it, whether it's, putting up for listing or putting an offer on the property. But where would you caution an agent, like, let's say that experienced agent who doesn't have the time, quote unquote, to say do a CMA, but they just know what the price is? Would you give them any sort of words of warning or advice in that side of things, just to make sure that you have something to back up those numbers that you're, pulling out at the top of your head?
I do believe that there comes a point before you're preparing an offer or before you're listing a property where you have to back up your knowledge. I truly believe that. It may not be when you're doing a listing presentation and you're talking about your experience and what you know that the property is worth, that's great. But before you list that house, you'd better come up with some comparables because you will be held to account if something goes badly. So even if you really know what you're talking about, unless of course you sold the exact same model, 3 times on the same street, you can speak to that, but it's always good to pull a little bit of paper. I believe in paper. That's sort of my
I
background.
think
And yeah,
I think we both do, right? Like, making
yeah,
sure you have something in writing is, I think, always important, right? To back up any sort of situation, whether it's a phone conversation you have with a client. Be like, I'm a big fan of saying after that, have that conversation, especially if there's anything that you had, like a material decision that you're making in the whatever the process was. Follow it up with a summary email, just to, like, be like, hey, just like to, summarize what we talked about, so you can have that conversation in writing afterwards. So if someone has revisionist history and, like, well, you didn't tell us about that, you didn't inform us about that, you'd be like, well, we did have email correspondence specifically about that, because people have a very bad habit, buyers and sellers, of forgetting what you told them over the phone. It does look like we got a question though,
okay,
Isabel. So
all
it's from
right.
iPhone. So iPhone, if you'd like to, mute your mic and ask your question, if you've
Hi,
got
it's
one.
Nicola. It's Nicola. Good morning, everyone.
Oh, hey, Nicola, how's
Oh,
it going?
Nicola.
I love the conversation, and may I pay a compliment to that microphone. The sound comes across really professional. Your voice. Yes, I'm
This
sorry.
microphone was
That was
not
the
cheap.
first
So.
thing. It was the first thing I recognized. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had such a beautiful voice. It's a microphone. It's a microphone. It's not all you. Anyway, sorry. A backwards compliment there. Sorry, Linus.
No, no, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, thanks, Nicola.
Anyways, always a pleasure. Question for you. I kind of disagree a little bit because you're talking about something that I do very well is sell homes all over Ontario, and I've never had an issue with pricing. And I was just wondering, um, uh, eh, wouldn't you say that the seller is actually signing off on your recommendation? Like we have dialogues about pricing on why this particular strategy is being utilized, and then we both come to a decision of what price we should list this property for. Not really so much about the value of the house, but about the strategy of how to obtain the highest price for the house. How how am I in wrong for having conversation with a client and having a client have a buy-in where we both mutually agree that, yeah, let's try this price and see. And ultimately, they are always in the driver's seat, as I tell them, that I don't sell your home. You're selling your home when you put your signature on the dotted line after we discuss the offer that's in front of us. Wrong approach?
Well, I'm
I'm
not
so
gonna,
glad you.
yeah, this is a great question and a great conversation. And all I can say to you, Nicola, is you have got excellent clients that listen to your strategy and work with you. Because I will tell you, in my 30 plus years, um, most sellers are I okay, I'm going to be careful how I phrase this. Most sellers want to optimize their sale price. Let's put it that way. Okay. And they
Yes.
don't necessarily buy into a realtor's strategy and listen to them. They, in their mind, know what they want to do. So it's up to the realtor, I think, to be able to substantiate what they're saying.
Manage
I
their
also
client.
Mhm.
Yeah, I also like what you're bringing up here, Nicole, too, because like this is there's two different things we're talking about here too, right? There's estimating the home value, and then there's the strategy of pricing, which is completely different too, right?
Fair enough.
So yes, like 100%, they're very different things. Just because you list a house below what you want to get for it doesn't mean you're not going to get that number, right? Maybe you're holding off offers, you're trying to like boost multiple offers type thing to get like a higher value for the property. And that has nothing to do with what you think the value of the property is and what you're advising it
Right.
may be, right? So
Right.
the listing strategy and pricing strategy and how you decide that you and your sellers want to sell the property together is 100% like it's very similar but different as well from just like coming up with what you feel the true value is and giving that kind of backup for it. And again, you're a good agent too, right? So you can handle those and navigate those situations very deftly. Whereas Isabel again brought up one of the other concerns that not every buyer will have this, or sorry, seller will have the same kind of buy-in from that
Correct.
discussion with
Correct.
their agency.
Correct. And that's
And
where I actually buy into your, I think it was you, Linus, who mentioned about always going back and doing a summary of your discussion. Um, because in that summary, I tend to talk about how we derived at this price, and that it's actually we are testing the market, in light of the real estate climate. And so that is in writing. So yeah, I do concur with that. But I just felt that, oh my gosh, I am breaking all the rules because I'm sorry, I don't do CMAs, like written CMAs. Like I of course I've done the research. Of course I know why. And I'm pretty bang on what I believe that house is going to go for. But I lean towards strategies after, seeing what the value is, but I do not give them an actual CMA. And I guess it's the way I manage the client. So anyways,
S- s-
this is
So the other
interesting.
important
Yeah.
thing that you mentioned in there too is that you said you do the research, right? And
Yes, I
that's the
do.
important
I
part.
do.
That's the big thing is that, if you ever have to come back and justify the advice that you're giving, the important thing is that
Correct.
I know you can, right? Even if you don't have like an official
Good point.
CMA,
Okay.
like
Good
you've
point.
done
Yeah.
the due diligence, you've done the legwork to try and figure that out, and not every agent does. And that's, I guess, the point that we're trying to come across is
Okay.
just be like,
Okay.
a fly by your seat of the pants answer is the one that we don't want people to be giving when people ask me how much is my home worth.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you.
But thanks so much for jumping. We should have made you the third host of
yeah.
this
You're
seminar. I was gonna
funny.
say podcast from the show.
Yeah, I'll be calling you because I'm serious about that. I need to get that microphone from you. I'm starting a podcast. I need that.
Well, come visit. Actually, I'm doing a seminar later this month on starting a podcast. We're getting a little off topic, so I'm gonna.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
Yes, I'm going out. Have a good day.
yeah, no problem. Thanks again, Nicole. And I love when people
Yeah.
jump in and ask like those relevant questions because that was a pretty important point to bring up too. I'm glad that she did. The next thing that we want to talk about too, though, is buying a like if you're going to a listing presentation, we've seen it before. Where an agent, you're like, oh man, that agent they bought the listing, right? They promised they can get $200,000 more than I know this property is worth, and how that's different than dealing with unrealistic sellers, right? The sellers that want to list it higher, and you're like, okay, well, even though I'm telling you it's lower, I'll still take the listing. And then the plan is to like work down, maybe test the market at a higher point and bring it down. Obviously, not ideal, but there is a big difference between the two, and knowing how to navigate that listing presentation to make sure that you can inform people and you can be concerned. I know Aaron always likes to use those words, right? I'd be concerned if someone's telling you they can sell your property for more than it's worth, and then that's actually going to harm you more in the end.
Well, it's funny, especially in the smaller marketplaces, the agents that buy a listing. And if you're working in an area specifically where a certain agent tends to buy listings and then just works them down, um, your whole presentation strategy as a buyer's agent can backfire on them because you know what they've done and you know that you're the one that's going to have to go in there and hopefully um, get the property down to market value. So just a little bit about buying listings. There are certain agents that do it, and it's much harder to pinpoint in a larger marketplace, but in the smaller ones, it's quite easy to pinpoint who does that constantly. So just keep your eye
And
out.
like I said, I've heard Aaron talk about this a lot, right? When you're in a
Yeah.
listing presentation, the best word, I think maybe Chris Lear is the one who always talks about this, is if you have an objection, excuse me, that you need to handle, and it's regarding something like another agent offering a higher price, less commission or whatever, is to have the conversation and say, you know what, I'd be concerned, and then dot dot dot, like I'd be concerned about listing your property too high because like you've seen the evidence I've shown you here, it's not worth that much. Like that, yes, this other agent is saying they can get more for it, but I'd be concerned if you went with someone who wasn't doing their research and due diligence properly. I'd be concerned with someone who's cutting their commission, that they wouldn't be doing the job that I'll be doing for you, that kind of thing. So it's important to get ahead of those things by like having that kind of conversation. And it leads down, it all comes down to like a client management situation too. All right. Just moving on to the next topic, showing properties. Some of these, I mean, I don't think we have to talk too much about these. It's kind of like obvious bullet points. But when you're showing properties, and this comes up more often than I'd like to admit, especially in our management meetings, when we put out memos and everything about it all the time. Respect the scheduled appointments that you make. You have to be there during the window. You can't go into the property 10 minutes early. You can't stay 10 minutes late. You have to be on time. If you're not going to be on time, reschedule. If you're not going to make it, make sure you cancel that appointment.
And just a little bit of a scare tactic because we see this constantly. The complaints to RICO and to the boards, the fines for not canceling a scheduled appointment go anywhere from $300 to $600, and that's usually on a first offense. So it's something they're coming down with a real hammer on it, and we're trying to talk about this in a conversational manner. But the powers that be, because clients are so angry about this. They're really coming down hard on it, and we're just advising our agents to very much respect those times. Now, I will tell you a horror story, and that is we had a new agent who just didn't feel that the properties his client wanted to see were within his area of travel because it was going to take him 45 minutes to show properties. And he actually gave out lockbox codes I believe it was 13 times. And we had all of that in texts, and Rico, actually, I'm surprised they didn't pull his license, but they were trying to fine him $60,000 for doing exactly what he did do. Now, we always have our agents back. The gentleman was new, and it was my responsibility to go in and defend him at Rico Court. And we did have I guess, a negotiation where I got his fine down to $13,000 from $60,000. But trust me on this, that's real cash. As a new agent, that's a lot of money. And if this is your way of supporting your family, having your livelihood in this profession, then all I can say to you is please try to treat it as a profession. And if you don't know or something doesn't feel right, give your manager a call. Give me a call. We'll talk it through. Because I will tell you, really and truly, this agent, you think it's common sense, but this agent didn't know that he did something wrong. This is not something that they absolutely put in black and white in real estate school. It's common sense, but obviously not everyone has common sense. So if anything ever feels wrong to you, please reach out.
Yep.
I'm
And be
looking
very
at some of the
careful.
comments here from Tammy. The story needs to be shouted far and wide. Yes, it does, because it happens far more often than you realize. Okay.
And I'm glad you pointed out because we didn't put a bullet point in here. It's one of those things that you feel like should be just obvious to everybody, but in the case like
Yeah.
you brought up, it wasn't, right? Just someone didn't know, unfortunately. But the other case that people have to be very careful is cutting corners, right? To save time. And that's
Mhm.
where I think a lot of people would give out those lockbox codes, and that doesn't make it right, right? Your responsibility and the standards that you're held to, that is pretty black and white. There's no gray there. You have to be there with your clients, with any sort of inspectors there on the property, right?
And I'm truly surprised in the example that I gave in 13 appointments that nobody called the police because the sellers were totally entitled to. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
it's trespassing.
nothing.
Yep. So next thing about showing properties, and this one's I think people are becoming more and more aware of this, but I've still run into a couple situations of this not being thought through as thoroughly as it should in the past couple of months. Is just making sure your clients are aware that they may be recorded inside and outside of the property. People have those, security cameras, Nest Ring doorbells, like all sorts of recording devices now. Um, just and for multiple reasons, you want to let them know about this. You want to make sure, well, first off, that that shouldn't matter if you're getting recorded or not, but you want to make sure your conduct in the property is above board. You hear and you see stories in the news all the time about realtors doing this or that in the property that they shouldn't be. They got caught on camera, and those are obviously horrible. And, they should have been doing those regardless of whether or not there are cameras there. But also importantly is you can lose a lot of negotiation leverage based on recorded conversations. You got to be careful about what you say inside of the property about how much you love it or how, you have to move in by a certain date or else you're going to lose your home or whatever it happens to be. Like that kind of conversation could be used against you in negotiation.
Yeah, we've had a couple of instances where our listing agents have had their sellers record things and come out on top during negotiations because of things they've heard. And it's always advisable to tell your buyers that definitely please keep your comments until we're away from the property and we can discuss it at that time because you never know what's being recorded and what isn't. Okay.
Yeah. If you're going to be talking about something you wouldn't talk about in front of the homeowner, you probably shouldn't be talking about it on the property.
Hmm.
Simple as that. Oops, try and move to the next slide there. And this is one that this goes for open houses as well. Make sure you keep people together. Don't let them split up and wander, right? There's a natural I mean, I've been guilty. I should probably shouldn't say this on video too, but I've been guilty about this in the past where, you go in with a couple or whatever. One person wants to look at the basement first, one person wants to look upstairs, they split up. Um, it's your responsibility to make sure that the people you're bringing through the property are properly conducting themselves. And you can't do that if you're not there present with them.
Well, especially during well, no, not especially during open houses, but what I used to find in open houses was the people coming in weren't necessarily there to see the home. They were there to see, it's almost like an interview of the agent who's hosting the open house. They want to see how you're treating that property. If they live somewhere in the neighborhood and are thinking of putting their own home on the market. They want to see how you conduct those open houses and if you have respect for the property and are controlling the process. So for the open houses, that's an important part of it. For just general showings and security of the property, you don't want people wandering around. They may open a window that you're not aware of, and then it's left open, or they, flip a lock on something that they shouldn't. You need to be with them. And if there are children involved in the showing, make sure they respect the property as well.
Yeah, well, good. Then I would never bring my kids on a showing, that's for sure.
Jumping on the beds, yes, we know.
And that rolls into proper etiquette, right?
Yeah,
Like, you make sure you secure the property, double check all the doors are locked when you're leaving, lights off, leave a card as well to make sure that you
yeah,
can show that you were actually there. So, for those of you who haven't been on a showing before, yeah, just put it on the kitchen counter. There's usually a pile of cards there already where the feature sheets are, or whatever it happens to be, just to make sure that they know that you actually went through the property yourself.
good.
Writing an offer. So, a couple questions. I'll just pose them straight up to you, Isabel. Can you recommend an
Okay,
offer price based solely on the list price? I guess we talked about this a little bit, and
we
I think
did.
Nicole kind of
And
brought some of this up too.
yeah, and I believe that you need to document what you're recommending to people. And I don't think that you can make that recommendation without some sort of substantial information for them. Remember, this can be, the largest investment of their lives. For a lot of people, it is. So the more information that you have for them, solid information, the better off I think you are.
Yeah, and that informs you the context too, right? Like, y list price is kind of arbitrary. We talked about it a little bit before. Like, you might be underpricing it to attract multiple offers. You may have an agent who bought a listing or unrealistic sellers, and it might be like really overpriced. And the only way that you can go in and effectively recommend what kind of pricing you should go in at is if you're well informed about that neighborhood, comparable properties, that sort of thing. So you know if they're in a situation where they're overpaying, or if you can expect that you're going to be in a multiple offer situation as well. Like I said, list price is pretty arbitrary. I could ask for $3 million for my house. It's not even worth close to that. Doesn't make it worth that because I asked for it, right? Listing price is just an asking price. It's not a sale price. Something to remember, especially for those newer agents.
Yeah, it's part of our due diligence and what we get. I mean, let's face it, we get paid very well for what we do. And however, having said that, you need to have the information for your clients. That's part of what we do. Um, and we earn our money by knowing what's going on in the marketplace and how we can advise our clients, and it's with solid information.
This is an interesting question. And this is one I got a couple weeks ago. We had an agent, a newer agent, who was representing a buyer, and they told their client, and they knew that they're going to be overpaying for the home based on the price they wanted to put in. It was a multiple offer situation too. And that agent came to me and was like, "Can I let them do this?" And well, I mean, I know the answer. What would you say the answer here is, Isabel? If your clients want to overpay for a property, do you let them?
Absolutely, yes. As long as they're aware that they are overpaying and that you've advised them as to the true value of the property, couple of things, that people will do what they want to do. And if they wish to overpay, they may have their reasons for doing it. It may be for them, the extra money that they're spending may be the value they need for their own situation, whether it's to live across the street from their parents or something like that, for whatever reason they want to overpay. But the other thing is, probably in 15 to 20 years, it's not going to matter, if
Yeah,
not even sooner than that.
yeah, it depends on the way the prices go, right? But yeah, like you said, and I've
Absolutely.
used the example plenty of times, like, if you overpay a little bit for a property because it's the property that you love, 20 years from now, like that property is gonna be worth a lot more, presumably, than the price you paid for it. And is there a price on that, right? Like the happiness that you can have by living in like the perfect ideal home. So
Exactly.
it's obviously important not to deceive clients and not let them know that you think that they are overpaying for like you want to make sure that they go in well informed and that it is their decision. And to be honest with you, like the price of a property is what someone's willing to pay for it. So you're kind of creating the value of the home because of the intangibles there too. And the same goes for the flip side as well. From like when you're listing a property and you're selling it, if sometimes you do, sell a property for less than you think it might be worth because of the situation of the client, right? And it necessitates it. They have to get it gone for X, Y, Z reason. Maybe they've already purchased a property and this is an SPP, or maybe they don't even have an sale purchase property clause in the buy-in and they're really distressed seller. All those come into effect when you're selling or purchasing properties. Okay. One thing we want to talk about a little bit is pressure sales versus helping the client see the forest for the trees. I found out last week that I've been saying this wrong all the time. I thought it was see the forest through the trees, but it's for the trees, because they're very different things, right? Pressure sales is something that I think is something that everybody should be staying away from. You never want to put someone in a situation where they feel like they have to because you're putting undue pressure on a client to accept an offer, whatever it is. There's a difference between pressuring and then helping the clients get out of their own way, right? I use an example all the time, came up a couple of years ago, where one client wanted to walk away from a purchase of a property because during home inspection the home inspector said they couldn't move this large dresser or whatever, and suddenly they were worried about what's behind the dresser. And I remember talking to that person being like, well, what's the worst thing that could be behind that dresser? It's like, well, if there's a big hole in the wall, I'm like, well, what would you do if there was a big hole in the wall? She's like, well, I know a great drywaller in town. I'm like, well, there you go. You'd probably just fix it, right? Like we can address some of these situations, like we can try and get back and see that thing, but like trying to avoid making that mountain out of that molehill is a lot different than pressuring someone into doing something, right? You're a problem solver. You want to try and come up with solutions, help them get out of their own way for these issues that they may perceive as large that aren't actually large, and help them get around them. But pressuring people is definitely something you want to avoid, because at the end of the day, it's not your paycheck that you have as your best interest. It's the client's needs and wants.
I think as well, a lot of the time people have, um, well, we're calling it buyer's remorse, because you start overthinking the purchase once you've made it, or you're being influenced by family and friends who are doubting your decision or questioning your decision to purchase. And that comes out usually at building inspection, or sometimes at a further viewing. So you as the agent have to help those people see again why they purchased the property that they did, why it was the right one, and that is seeing the forest for the trees, that is getting around that small um, doubt in the buyer's mind. Whereas if something really important comes up on building inspection, that's often I have seen an agent try to pressure a client to get through that. And so those are the two differences in helping a person through it, or, pressuring them into something they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and sometimes it is the right decision to walk away,
Yeah,
right? And just being able to identify when that is versus trying to get something across the finish line. Make sure it's always for the right reasons. Like I said, Isabel hit the nail on the head. Like buyer's remorse kicks in, more often than not, and just make sure you manage that and try and keep positive about things is very different than, especially as soon as someone starts to feel they're getting pressured. That's when you lose a client very quickly and things go south in a hurry. So just make sure that you don't never they never have the impression that they feel like you're pressuring them too, right? You're there to help. You're there to inform. You're there to help get to their goal, which is getting the house of their dreams. Just be really careful about how you navigate that situation.
yeah.
Oh, fun topic, Isabel. We only got a couple
Oh,
more here, but multiple
okay.
representation.
All right.
Everyone's got their own kind of opinion on it. I guess the big question off the top: should you ever do it? And it's not against the rules, but it's highly, um, advisable to
Discouraged.
avoid it
Yeah, it's
in
highly
any situation.
discouraged. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for the proper words for that. I guess that discourage is the best way to put it, and that's something that has come out of Tressa, but I mean, it was always around before Tressa as well to avoid multiple representation where you can. So, why don't you tell us about a few strategies that we've often advised agents to help avoid multiple representation in different scenarios?
Okay. Well, the big one, because it's very difficult to wear two hats at the same time. So it's next to impossible to really and truly support the buyers and the sellers' best interests at the same time. Now, it can be done, but ways to really avoid it. The one I really like is to partner with another agent in the office that you trust. You do business in the same manner, you have the same sort of standards. If you can find an agent like that where you can actually pass clients back and forth whenever possible, that's one way of doing it, and I think it's something that we should all keep in mind. Um, Open houses on your own listing are a tough one. I would again, offer to have another agent in the office partner with me on an open house where you're representing the seller and the other agent can work with a buyer who comes through. And again, splitting a commission, offering referrals on this, there's no problem with that. Um, just remember that it's always the client's best interest that you're looking towards. Referring buyer leads for your listing, I think is the way to go in most cases, and hopefully that becomes reciprocal within your business relationship with someone else in the office.
Yep. I've talked to lots of agents who say like, they see the dollar signs, right? You
Yeah.
see multiple rep, you're like, well, I can like make, twice as much, say, off of a deal as you would if you just represent one side. And one thing I like to say in those situations is if you do have a partner that you're swapping things back and forth, there's still the same number of deals that are getting done here, right? If you have someone who does similar volume to you, you pass along, those buyer clients that are offering on your property to them and vice versa. The law of reciprocation would work there. You'd get just as many deals done. You pass referral fees back and forth. You make the same amount of money at the end of the day, but you stay above board. I know obviously not every situation you'd be able to do something like that as cleanly as you can, but this is like the kind of gold standard that you're kind of working towards to try and make sure you have that. So if you have a good agent you're partnering with, it's not like you're losing money because if you're sending them stuff, they're sending you stuff back. It's the exact same income potential, but you can stay out of RICO jail. You can stay above board. You can represent both sides, or both sides can be represented by their own party. So you have the true representation that they're looking for.
I've got a horror story on this one if you want to hear
Oh,
it.
sure. I love hearing horror stories. We got way too many of them, unfortunately.
I know. We had an agent, very reputable agent who knew exactly what he was doing. he took a $4 million listing. So do the math on the commission on that one. And the neighbor wanted to buy the property. And the neighbor was insisting that there was multiple representation. He wanted um, both sides represented by the listing agent. The listing agent went to the seller. He got all the permissions, and it was when Tressa was very new. So what our agent did was he asked both parties to come into the office and do the negotiation in front of the manager in the Richmond Hill office. So everything was completely above board and done very professionally and very well. And during the negotiations, after the offer went back and forth several times, the listing or the seller said to the listing salesperson, you know what? This isn't going to come together. Why am I paying you if you're not fighting for me? And the moral of the story is try to stay out of multiple rep. Our agent lost the listing, lost the deal. The people went out and did it privately about 6 months later. Okay? So just a word to the wise, try to stay out of multiple rep.
Yeah, a lot of people, even though they acknowledge and they sign the form saying they understand what multiple rep is, when it comes to a practical standpoint, like Isabel just gave there, they do not actually understand what it is until it comes to it. So just being really careful is important.
Yeah.
So it's good that Tammy and Lona are on the call here too, because I was going to use them as an example here as a team that does a really great job of avoiding multiple rep. And if you have a team, one of the best strategies to do that is to have one person work all the listings and one person work all the buyers.
And
Right?
how you designate your commissions has nothing to do with the actual representation of the clients. So you can always work that out between you and you do your disclosures to the clients and you're good to go. I really like that way of doing things where you have a listing agent and a buyer's agent. It keeps everything neat and separate.
Not everyone has the luxury of doing that, though.
I
We've
know.
got quite a few husband and wife teams or brother sister teams or brother brother teams, like that kind of thing, where they just tend to work all of their clients together. Do you have any sort of strategies there, Isabel, for how they can represent both sides,
I think
given
they have to make some decisions in their business practice as to who is representing a seller and who is representing the buyer, or, alternate it or something like that. Because if you truly are representing people in a professional manner, you can't distance yourself from the information and your obligations to them. So you do have to come up with some sort of a system where one is representing the seller and one is representing a buyer.
and we've helped agent teams craft different clauses and things that they can put into the Schedule A of their buyer and listing rep agreements too. So if you're in a situation where you're starting up a team or you're on a team, and you want to try and navigate that, just give me myself or Isabel a call.
Yep,
One question I've had a lot of too is from teams. So can I just remove myself as a designated rep on an agreement and then like represent the other side? And pretty simple answer to that question, eh, Isabel?
it is. The answer is no, because you're already um, in um, in a relationship where people were with people where you know their motivation, where oftentimes you know their bottom line, you know their situation, and you can't just remove yourself from that knowledge.
There's no revisionist history. If you
Mhm.
started representing them, you can not just say, "Look, I'm not no longer representing you here. I'll remove myself from that contract."
Exactly.
And this one will be a quick one too. We just wanted to bring up because this has come up sometimes recently. I put advertising representations, but it's more about like representing yourself. Let's say you're doing a door knock, or if you're doing a leave behind in a door knocking situation too, and you say something along the lines of like, I've buyer for your property. Let's chat." And I know agents who've said that and they don't have a buyer. You want to talk a little bit about that, Isabel, and how that is something you shouldn't be doing?
You need to avoid telling lies while you're out there doing your business. There is nothing wrong with going out door knocking and saying that there's interest in the area. My suggestion is something like we've just sold a house, and remember the royal we is the brokerage. We've just sold a house down the street, and we have several other buyers looking in the neighborhood. Always sort of phrase your conversations with the truth and something like that. I mean, I could come up with buyers for any neighborhood at this point in an 800-person brokerage. So be truthful while you're out there. If you do have a buyer, though, you can specifically use that. However, if you do not, please be a little bit more careful about what you're out there saying and letting the public think about you as a person.
Yeah, we've done some door knocking seminars and sessions where we've gone out as a group and done some door knocking in the area. And one of the exercises we have is be okay, like before we go out, let's try and identify someone who's got a buyer in this neighborhood. So we have that as an icebreaker, right? You can knock on the doors, be like, listen, we have a buyer for the neighborhood. It's a great family. They really want to move into the school district, whatever the situation is. But we base it on an actual person who's got a buyer, right? It doesn't have to be the person door knocking, which is what Isabel's getting at. Like we have a buyer. It's the royal we. They're represented by the brokerage. That's okay. Like you do have a buyer. It might not be someone that you're representing yourself as a designated representative, but someone that the brokerage is representing. And finding those kind of scenarios and even just having a bit of a profile on the person to bring a bit of humanity to the story, I found is always a very important thing. It's something that I talked to Sylvia, our Hamilton manager, extensively about. It's good to humanize some of these stories, not just I have a buyer, like give them a little bit of a human aspect to it too. If you're doing a leave behind or you're doing the door knock, at the end of the day, like we know that this is all just it's an icebreaker, right? Like the chance that person wanting to sell their house, pretty slim. I mean, great if it is because you can potentially represent them as a seller and you've got the buyer for it too, right? So you maybe put something together, but it's really just to start the conversation and have a reason to be there and have a reason to have that conversation with them. But yeah, making sure you don't lie. Please, please don't lie about these things. It's not hard to find a truthful story in this and like find something to talk to
Absolutely.
people about.
And if you do have a legitimate buyer for that area, I mean, that is a good reason to go out and door knock an area. And if you do have a legitimate buyer, give the people some real concrete details about the buyer. It's a young family. They want to put their child in this school. They're looking specifically for a side split. They have parents moving in with them who aren't great on stairs, things like that, that you can get into a conversation about where you're not giving specifics about the people, but you are giving details and making sure that the people that you're contacting know that this is a legitimate situation.
And talk about great opportunity. If you've got a buyer and you're like, oh man, there's no listings for this buyer in the neighborhood they want again, like go out and door knocking. Like that buyer will see the value in you as a realtor, be like, oh man, you're gonna go and knock on doors and try and find someone to like sell their house to me. Like that's a pretty fantastic above and beyond that not a lot of agents would do, right? So you can turn it into a big positive and you can use it as an opportunity to door knock as well. But yeah, well, let's move on to the next thing we want to talk about, giving advice. And this is, I believe, yeah, this is the last thing on the docket. Thanks everyone for sticking around for a little bit longer than we expected to. This is really important, right? A lot of agents fall into the trap because we have to wear a lot of hats. You know, you're a little bit of a, I'll be careful what I'm saying here, but you're a little bit of a lawyer, a little bit of a tax person, you're a little bit of an accountant, you're a little bit of a well, a lot of a salesperson, you're a lot of a psychologist. There's a lot of different hats that you have to wear on the periphery, but being careful when you put that hat on, when you give official advice and knowing where to draw the line between what is not your job and when you're not an expert in the legal side of things, when you're not a lawyer, when you're not an expert on giving tax advice or accounting advice because you're not an accountant, or technical advice as well, right? Like you aren't a home inspector, you aren't licensed to give advice on those kind of aspects as well. So I know there's some fuzziness here too, because you want to be able to speak knowledgeably about a lot of these subjects, but there's a difference between speaking knowledgeably and giving some information versus giving advice.
And I think part of, well, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. And I know when I get a lot of calls from either agents or the other managers, it's almost a laughing point now that if I don't know specifically, my go-to is call the client's lawyer. Let's get some legal advice, or let's call um, the accountant, because we are in a position of doing real damage if we give the wrong information. And if we don't know after years of experience or experience in certain situations, then it's always good to go to the experts and at least put the onus where it belongs, and that's on the experts. And hopefully protect our agents, our clients, and ourselves.
I find the agents that tend to fall into this trap more than they should is the newer agents who don't want to look stupid, right?
Mhm.
You're there, you like want to have all the answers. And one thing I always like to say is like it's okay not to have all the answers at the tip of your fingers, but you still want to help them solve the problem, right? If they have a question about one specific thing, whatever it is, legal, tax advice, or whatever. If you don't know the answer, please don't pretend like you know, but use it as an opportunity to solve the problem, right? You can always say, like, don't say I don't know. I always feel like that's like a very negative way of doing it. Being like, that's a great question. Depending on what it is, you can say like, I've never been asked that before. That's really insightful. I'm gonna check with XYZ person, manager, whoever it is, to make sure that that I can get you like a really proper response on that. Right? There's different ways to handle that kind of interaction to make sure you can give the person the confidence that you're going to use your resources at your disposal to make sure you can answer the question thoroughly and appropriately. And like Isabel said, sometimes the proper answer is, well, let's get you on the phone with your lawyer and you can ask them that question because that's something that a lawyer should really be advising you on. Yep. And you know what, Isabel? I think we made it to the end.
Oh, very nice. Ethics are
Yeah.
everything.
Ethics
Everything.
are everything. Stay out of that RICO jail. Very important. Just stay above board. And you know, if you're ever not sure about something, just call your manager. There's never a situation where there's a stupid question. I mean, there are some stupid questions, but you know, it's okay to ask stupid questions, right? Because everyone's been there. Not everyone has all the knowledge. The worst thing you can do is just make assumptions, do things that you're not sure about. It's sometimes a quick phone call to manager, lawyer, whoever it is you need to ask advice about can clear up a lot of things. So just make sure that you know what you're getting into and use the resources at your fingertips. So
And know that we are always there for your calls, and we have a great group of managers that are here to help support you. And we have these conversations all the time to come up with the right answers for you.
that's right. Now, does anyone have any questions before we roll off here?
I think there was
Um,
something in the chat.
I saw something just pop up in the chat. Okay, so as a new agent, how do you know where the line is in terms of how much you should know about different fields? Sometimes I feel like clients get frustrated when you redirect them to other professionals. So that's
A
tough,
lot of
right?
it comes with experience. Some of it, well, actually, more than some of it, a lot of it comes with your training. And if you're a newer agent, even sessions like this or any of the training that we offer is a good support for you. I really believe that taking the training not only opens you up to the topics that we're training, but it opens you up to the other agents and conversations with them, and that's also a learning experience.
We're always learning. Like even the most experienced agent's always going to be learning more and trying to understand more about different parts of the industry, right? One thing I always do is I carry a little notebook around with me most places I go, and if there's something that I'm like, I don't really know as much about that topic, whatever it is that I should. I'll make a note of it and I'll make sure that I go out and do a little bit of due diligence. Maybe it's like I need to learn more about like how septic systems work, whatever it is. Like you don't have to be an expert, right? But you want to have a cursory knowledge of a lot of these things. Or
Mhm.
if you're a newer agent, the first time you're going to see rural properties, maybe you should learn a little bit about how septic systems work, how, like what is involved with the well, things to like look out for in a rural property, especially if you grew up in the city, you never had exposure to these things, right? Just YouTube is an amazing resource as well. You got to be careful about some of the advice you find there. Like always go to our training first, but there are a lot of resources out there to find more information, do more due diligence. And you know what? There's books too. Those things still exist. You can find some pretty good books out there. I know a home inspector here in Kingston who gives out a book about home inspection to every client that she works with too. So there are a lot of valuable resources and textbooks, that kind of thing too. So one of my goals is to try and read that book that she provided, just to kind of get a bit more of a knowledge about what home inspectors go through. And there's a difference between having that knowledge and then giving advice on those specific things. Like just because you read a textbook doesn't mean you can look at that basement and know with a large certainty, if there is evidence of X, Y, or Z leaking, whatever it is, mold, that kind of thing. You have some ideas and some concerns. Be like, I know that thing's concerning. I think we should get that checked out. But yeah, just be careful about giving that kind of advice. But knowledge is important.